Before the kings drew borders with iron and ink, the Wildering reigned, an old forest with a mind the size of weather. In that living cathedral, a horned warder kept the peace. Her name was Mir, and she wore a crown of woven thistles that never wilted and antlers dark as midnight sap. When she breathed, owls hushed out of courtesy. When she laughed, foxgloves leaned to listen. The Wildering had its laws. None might cut a heart tree. None might take a river's name in vain. None might cross a threshold uninvited, save Mir, who was threshold and invitation in guard in one. She was not born, she was shaped, poured from storm, stitched by briar, taught by the oldest bee how sweetness survives thorn. On the far edge of the Wildering stood Greywall, a human city with stone teeth and ambition for a tongue. Two princes lived within, Alden, firstborn, dutiful in the way a locked door is dutiful, and Corin, his younger brother, whose eyes looked like lakes right before rain. Their father, King Luth, loved conquest the way some men love sons, badly and loudly. It was Corin who found Mir, though found is too brave a verb for nearly stumbling into an enchanted being. He chased a hawk past a marker stone and into a clearing where the ground went soft and the air went serious, as if breath had laws here. Mir turned, and every story he'd been told about monsters frayed. She did not look like a lesson. She looked like truth grown wild. "You are lost," she said. "Not a question, a mercy." "I am curious," he said, which is the honest cousin of lost. "Those two traveled together," she replied. "You crossed a promise to come here." He should have begged pardon and fled. Instead, he stayed and gave his name. The Wildering held it like a pebble warmed in a hand. Mir tasted its shiver and returned it unharmed. He came back. Curiosity has a map even when men do not. They measured each other in small units first. Questions, glances, the distance an outstretched palm travels before it decides to be a hand. He brought stories of Greywall's markets and hounds and stupid politics. She brought him to a fallen log dense with mushrooms that knew the shapes of moons, and to a sunken pool where stars slept in daylight. He reached, once, to touch a thorn at her temple. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Only when men lie," she said, and he swore to keep her crown painless. Promise is a creature with two stomachs. It digests slowly and it remembers everything. Word travels in forests without needing feet. Mir's counsel, older spirits, a queen of moths, a stag with glass in his gaze, disapproved of a prince tangled in their mistress's afternoons. But the Wildering's oldest law is balance. If the boy soothed the ache that winter left in the oak's ankles, perhaps he had a place here. Then Alden followed Corin one dusk, as brothers do, angry at being loved less by songs. He saw Mir kiss his brother under a hem of leaves. He saw the Wildering lean closer as if blessing. And he went home with a story sharpened by envy. Greywall's king listened. So did men who sell iron and call it peace. "The warder seduces our heirs," the whispers said. "The warder steals loyalties from the crown." Luth's advisors spoke of treaties with axes and made offers to the shadows that wait beside any throne. Alden found a smith whose hammers never missed and a hedge witch who smiled too wide. Together they forged a thing like a promise turned inside out, a snare of cold iron laced with a lie. On the feast of first harvest, Corin asked Mir to walk with him at the edge of the Wildering's law, where roots soften and fields begin. "See what I might make," he said, "where your forest shakes hands with my city. Not a road you hate, but a path that asks permission." "Ask the river," Mir said, amused. "It speaks worse of roads than I do." They were laughing when the snare sang. Cold iron bit Mir's ankle. Her magic sparked against it and burned blue. The lie laced through the metal. "You're a thief." Tricked the earth beneath her. The ground refused to hold. She fell. Alden stepped out with soldiers who looked apologetic in the way wolves look sad at a fence. "By law of Greywall and right of men," he said, "which is how theft dresses up for court, the monster is bound." "Monster," Mir repeated, tasting the word like ash. "I held your storms quiet. I kept the nettles from your children's legs. I taught your crows not to gossip at funerals. Then you know how to say goodbye," Alden said, and the men dragged her into a cart that smelled of iron filings and fear. Quarren ran to stop them and found his brother's hand like a gate. "Trust me," Alden murmured for the soldiers to hear, "I'll keep her safe." Mir did not flinch. Fear is clever, contempt is quicker. "Men who speak safety to cages," she said, "forget the lock teaches itself your name." They locked her in the cell below the throne room where old kings dried into statues. The Wildering shuddered. Vines unlearned their grips. Bees lost interest in sweetness. Moths bumbled into lamps and perished confusing fire for stars. 3 nights Mir listened to the stone learn her weight. On the 4th, a visitor came with a lamp hooded so low even his guilt could have hidden in its shade. Jeremy would not be born for centuries in a different tale. Here, it was Alden, smelling of victory patched over insecurity. "I saved you from worse," he said. "Is there a worse," she asked, "than a man who thinks me furniture?" He smoothed his jealousy with statecraft. "Greywall needs to eat," he said. "We'll cut your Wildering at its edges. In return, I'll let you keep the middle." "My forest is not a loaf to slice," she said. "And I am not your steward." He tried charm. It sat on him like borrowed armor. "If you bless my crown, the people will love it. I'll be generous with what's yours." "You cannot be generous with what you stole," she said. "You can only learn the word return." He left angry, which is to say small, and called for the hedge witch with the too wide smile. They held a ceremony draped in piety. Alden swore oaths to protect land he had already promised to bite. He knelt before the bound warder and asked blessing. Mir, who had kept storms on leashes and taught nettles to leave babies' wrists unbidden, looked at the man who had taken her from her forest like a knife installed in a wall, and understood something cruel and exact. Sometimes mercy is how tyrants breathe. She spoke a blessing that moved like winter. "I cannot bless theft," she said, voice deep with root and grievance. "But I can share with you the consequence you bought. You will wear Thorn as crown. Your heirs will be born with dry tongues, unable to taste honey or truth, or a lover's name without bitterness, unless one of your blood returns what you took and kneels not to me but to the Wildering." Gasps dressed themselves as prayer. The hedge witch hissed. Alden laughed to show he did not fear. But even he felt the prickle at his scalp, as if something invisible had learned the shape of his brow. Mir waited for someone in the room to be wise. She waited for Quarren. He did not come. A day later, he broke her cell instead. He had the face of a man who had learned to run from himself. "Forgive me," he said without waiting to be forgiven. He had keys he should not have had and a horse that hated iron. "I was wrong to trust Alden with meanings. I was wrong about safety and crowds and what love can persuade men to be." "You were wrong about hurry," she said, but took his hand. They fled through the servant ways, past the kitchens where grief learned to knead, out into rain that was not ready to be heroic. Greywall's bells tried to sound like justice. They sounded like cookware. At the Wildering's border, the snare's lie tugged Mir back, but the forest reached and reached. Roots rose like arms. Ferns unfurled like old letters. A willow stooped and scraped the iron from her ankle with bark soft as apology. Home, the Wildering murmured in every tongue that trees know. She turned to Corin. You crossed once for curiosity. You cross now for regret. If you cross again, it must be for work. Teach me, he said. Then begin by listening, she said, and the forest held the lesson open like a door that can be shut on fingers if you're not careful. Deep in Greywall, Alden stood with a crown of thistle he couldn't seem to remove without bleeding. Monster, he said to his mirror. The mirror returned someone who believed himself a victim of wildness. A man like that will call disaster destiny and hire it to guard his sleep. The Wildering readied for siege. Mir braided nettles with starlight and spoke to the wolves in the voice reserved for oaths. Hold, she told them. Not for me, for the part of the world that forgets sugar. The oldest bee arrived late, dusted with history. You cursed a king, it buzzed, not disapproving, not impressed. Curses are roads. See where yours goes when no one is looking. I will, Mir said, and the bee accepted this as payment. That autumn, children born in Greywall licked honey and found it tasted like iron. When someone said I love you, the words stuck to their teeth and cut them. Men kissed and flinched. Women prayed and found their prayers rudely flavored with doubt. Bakers cried into their cakes. Wine went to vinegar out of solidarity. The city learned new recipes for bitterness. Alden pretended this was a fad he could legislate against. The Wildering waited. Waiting is an old spell if done properly. 2 winters passed. King Luth died with a last breath that tried to apologize to a forest and didn't have the intelligence. Alden took the throne with Thistle in his brow and a smile that asked sculptors not to be literal. The first tree fell at the 3rd thaw. The Wildering shivered, all the way down to the fungus that retells everything. A raven went still in a branch too suddenly bare, then lifted and flew to Mir with a caw like a slashed page. They cut, it said. Then we answer, Mir replied, with memory. She stepped to the border. Her antlers caught the first light. The men on the far side felt like boys who had touched a fence with their tongue and learned winter's humor. Bring me Corin, Mir said in a voice that understood what orders cost. Or bring me your son and ask him to learn how to forgive you for trying to feed him wood. The men brought both, Corin, unarmed and ashamed, and a child with a mouth already dry. Mir knelt to the boy first. I cannot uncurse your king, she said. He earned his drought, but the forest can share water with any thirst that is not arrogant. She touched her finger to his tongue. A fern unfurled in his throat and taught it to be soft again. He laughed. It didn't cut. Alden heard about this and called it treason to be kind without his permission. Corin took Mir aside and looked at her the way people look at doorways that won't widen. Tell me what to do. Kneel, she said, to what I kneel to. And what is that? He asked. Balance, she said, and the part of the world that keeps promising it will be better next season. He knelt, not to her, to soil. Then he pressed his palm to the ground and whispered the names of things that had made him less foolish. A hawk he'd tried to impress and failed. A servant who taught him to sweep. A book that would not let him be the hero and yet kept him turning pages. The Wildering listened like a court where truth is finally the most interesting witness. Rise, Mir said when the forest had had its fill. He did, with dirt on his knee and a face less in love with mirrors. I'll bring water to Greywall, he said. I'll build with river's consent. I'll teach my brother to eat bitterness with a knife and fork. You will fail, she said, and if you think that unkind you have not been alive long enough. Then you will learn. Then you will try again without the parts of yourself that liked the failure." He kissed her like an oath that understood it was not supposed to be poetry. The Wildering exhaled, which is how a forest smiles. For 1 year, Greywald tried. For 1 year, the axes stayed sheathed. For 1 year, Alden pretended restraint was a strategy of conquest. Then harvest failed because curses get bored when unattended and ask for fresh toys. The city's mouths went dry with grief. Corin begged Mir for counsel. Alden sought the hedge witch. The witch liked points. She drew a circle shaped like hunger around a hill where old stories go to sharpen. She asked for payment no one could afford. Alden offered the only thing he truly owned, his capacity to listen. She took it. After that, the king could not hear anything except his own plans. At the next thaw, he ordered a road stabbed through the Wildering to bring trade and sensibility. The road, more insult than path, bit a heart tree. The Wildering stood. Then it remembered that mercy has a second stomach, and this one was empty. The storm Mir loosed had manners. It knocked on the city walls and asked if anyone remembered song. When no one did, it put a river on those stones and called it history. The road tried to be argument. It became driftwood. Alden blamed monsters. Men like him always outsource their second thoughts. He marshaled an army of men with axes and men with words sharp enough to sound like truth in mouths unpracticed in tasting it. He rode with them wearing a crown of thistle that had learned where to dig. He promised order to boys who longed for permission. Mir waited at the border. Corin stood at her side with empty hands. "Brother," he called, "turn back. Kneel to what we kneel to. You will taste honey again." Alden laughed. "I can buy honey. Not the kind that makes bread kinder," Corin said. "Not the kind that makes confession possible." They met on sod that had no patience for speeches. Alden swung a sword at magic. It met antler. Sparks wrote small childhoods in the air and went out wanting bedtimes. The hedge witch threw curses like gossip. Mir caught them and returned them unfinished. Curses are sloppy when paid in arrogance. Alden reached the tree line. His blade nicked a birch. The Wildering took that pain personally. Mir bowed her head and the forest moved with her. Nettles becoming ropes. Roots becoming wrists. Branches becoming hands that remember how to hold. The army did not die. It got lost, in a carefully moderated way that taught humility. Men found themselves 3 days later beside their own hearths with wildflowers in their boots and names in their mouths they didn't know how to pronounce. Alden alone reached the heart tree. He lifted his sword and chose the wrong sort of cutting. Mir stepped between steel and bark and took the blow in her antler. It cracked. The sound turned birds to knives. Corin moved without thinking. He has always been at his best when rescued from his thoughts. He grabbed the blade with both hands. It cut him. He bled like a lesson into the ground. The Wildering drank and decided he could stay. Alden raised the sword again. Mir did not flinch, which is not always bravery. Sometimes it is boredom with men who write the same scene twice. Then a sound pulled the king's head sideways. A child's laugh, clear and sweet, from the edge of the forest. Laughter is treason to bitterness. He faltered. He remembered, very briefly, the taste of pears when he was 8. A curse is a road. This one had reached a fork. "Choose," Mir said. "I do not tell you which path leads to sugar. I tell you that one exists and you will not find it by stabbing maps." Alden lowered the sword. He did not kneel. He did something rarer for a king with dry lips. He shut up. The hedge witch hissed. "Silence is bad for business." She fled toward a different story that would gratefully mistake her for plot. The Wildering let everyone breathe. This is not forgiveness, Mir said to Alden, but it is a pause. He walked away as if learning the alphabet of heavy things. Corin swayed. Mir caught him. She laid him in moss. She whispered the names of fungi that make dying slower and less rude. He slept like someone who has earned more mornings than he thought possible. Mir watched his chest rise and fall and decided that hope is best practiced in low light. Above them, the oldest bee circled once and then twice, tracing the shape of a crown in air. "See where your road goes," it buzzed. "I will," Mir said again. The road went toward spring. What Mir did not yet know: curses thrown across bloodlines can bend in strange weather. The dry tongue of Greywall would find a shape to distract itself with sweetness. It would take the shape of a child. And that child would grow teeth. They named her Elowen because it sounded like a river saying yes. She was Alden's firstborn and his city's bright obsession. Nurses placed honey on her lips out of tradition. It tasted like salt. Alden wept without understanding whether it was because of joy or because of curses. Corin visited, stood at the door as if the threshold might scold him, and offered the child a piece of moss. She gripped it like an inheritance. Elowen grew under banners of compromise. Greywald tried to be tender to a forest it had insulted. The Wildering tried to forgive a city that had called it monster. Mir tried to keep the peace while the thistle she'd woven into a curse kept humming at the back of her tongue. Children born during the pause tasted sweetness only in wild things. City cakes disappointed. Market pears lied. But berries stolen from hedgerows forgave every error. Clover sucked on the walk home tasted like the first truthful sentence a person says. The bakeries suffered. The beekeepers flourished. The bee who had counseled Mir made excellent trade. Elowen roamed. She kicked off shoes like opinions. She drew on walls and explained the drawings so thoroughly no one remembered to scold. She climbed anything that gave her a reason not to stay on the ground. She wandered to the edge of the Wildering and found a woman with antlers looking at a river as if it had just confessed to being sky in disguise. "Are you the witch?" Elowen asked. Children respect rumors only enough to test them. "I am the warder," Mir said, and tilted her head to hear how the child's name would fall. "And you are a fracture. Or a bridge. Both start the same. Do bridges get stories?" Elowen asked. "They are stories," Mir said. "People walk on them to get to sentences they would not have found otherwise." Elowen decided that was acceptable. She returned whenever tutors bored her or courtiers smelled like boredom hiding in perfume. Mir told her the laws of nettles. Elowen told her the laws of children. They are not laws, they are experiments. Alden approved of the friendship because it brought the forest closer to behaving like an ally in court portraits. Corin approved because loving someone who loved a person he loved counts as a type of courage he could manage. When Elowen was 8, she took a thorn from Mir's crown and planted it in the courtyard. "I am making a rule," she announced. "No one can lie near this." The thorn sprouted overnight into a bush that smelled like regret and roses. Courtiers who previously lied for breakfast found themselves choking on eggs. Alden walked past and tasted the day's speeches turning to vinegar in his mouth. He ordered the bush moved. The bush refused. It had learned obstinacy from its mother. At 12, Elowen traveled with Corin to the Wildering's heart to see the bees' cathedral. She twirled in the hum and asked if insects have names that fit under crowns. "They have names that fit inside nectar," Mir said. The girl offered her wrist, and a bee climbed on like a jewel that refuses to be still. The hedge witch returned, trying to look smaller. She had traded clients in darker rooms for more interesting power. She met Elowen at the market and sold her a ribbon that would not tangle if the wearer spoke only truth. Elowen bought 2 and tied one to Myr's antler when the warder stooped to let her. "So you will tell me when a story is only joke," the girl said. "I will tell you when a joke is secretly a knife," Myr promised. The curse on Greywall shifted around this child the way fog decides to be a path. She tasted city honey and grimaced. She drank river water and learned why patience is thicker than sugar. Alden took to walking the city alone at dawn when even kings can pretend to be necessary rather than merely present. He passed the thorn bush and bowed to it, partly because it would not move, partly because it had taught him the one useful trick of leadership. Leave alone what you do not understand if it does not devour children. Whispers thickened, as they do around girls with friendships older than men's stories. The warder stole the princess, some said. The princess stole the warder, said others. They will unmake the curse, the hopeful said. They will break the forest, said men whose investments preferred axes. Elowen grew into edges. She learned to fence with words from Claire, who had not been born here, from June, not yet a name, from a city's gossip that trains you to spot weak floors. She practiced humility by visiting bakers whose cakes tasted like politics and buying them anyway. She practiced arrogance by asking Myr to show her where the Wildering keeps its secrets and then not entering when told not today. The day came when Alden took ill. Not the kind of ill that courts enjoy, dramatic pallor, doctors hurry, but the true kind, forgetting words, losing taste for power, waking frightened by noises he himself had invented. Corin sat at his bedside and did not rehearse his grief. Elowen stood at the window and watched a storm fail to be impressive. Myr sent moss and mushrooms meant for thinking. Alden refused them because he had spent a life refusing what helped. He died with a thorn print still on his brow. Elowen, at 16, wore the city's expectations like a dress tailored too quickly. Counselors lined up to teach her how to be sensible. She asked them to define sensible. They answered with the architecture of walls. She read their diagrams and marked all the places where bridges might be more interesting. At the coronation, the crown of iron brushed her head and found no purchase. It remembered Thistle and decided not to bite a girl who tasted like rivers. She spoke her oaths in a voice that made bees pause mid-waggle. "I swear to kneel where I should," she said, looking toward the Wildering, "and stand where kneeling would be cowardice." Some men applauded because they had daughters. Some did not because they had investments. That night, the hedge witch visited again and made her largest error. She offered a gift that did not ask permission of the old laws. A spindle whittled from a heart tree fallen in a storm 3 rains ago. "Prick your finger," she said, "and you will dream the dream you deserve. A vision of a Greywall without drought and a Wildering without teeth." Myr arrived before Elowen could accept a story that's seductive. She stepped out of shadow like someone who invented it. "Dreams that arrive on demand are only brochures," she said. "Thank the witch and give the toy to a museum." Elowen laughed and returned the spindle. The witch smiled too wide and left with a curtsy that tasted like a plot reheated. Days after, something stranger than curses crept across the city, a sweetness that lied. Cakes tasted honest. Wine stopped telling the truth about intent. Lovers whispered sugary drafts of speeches they did not mean. The thorn bush in the courtyard turned its leaves to show their pale undersides, a plant's way of saying beware. "Someone is sugaring the curse," Myr said, combing the air with her fingers for the threads that mages use when they are lazy. "I meant your mouths to be dry until you learned to stop stealing. Whoever did this wants you to think you already have." Elowen ordered honey barrels inspected. She found nothing except bees politely offended. She traced the sweetness back to the river and found it in the eddies where city boys rinse fish guts and secrets. A syrup, she said. A spell with manners, polite enough to hide in everything. Corin tasted it and shut his eyes. I feel brave, he said, without earning it. That, said Mir, is how empires die. They followed the syrup upstream to a mill owned by a gentleman who kept pianos in rooms that did not know the notes. In the attic, jars labeled compliance, contentment, quiet. A woman in a gray dress stirred a vat with a paddle and sang a nursery rhyme to a spell that believed her. The hedge witch curtsied when she saw them. You cannot keep pitching me the same story, Elowen said, annoyed. The spindle, the sweetness, the shortcut, all the same shape. Everyone wants to be good without the nuisance of doing it, the witch replied. I sell that. Elowen tipped the vat. Syrup ran down the stairs like a plant undone. Outside, bees descended with the wrath of patient creatures interrupted. They drank the sweetness and spit it onto stones until it lost interest in lying. The witch fled under a hex that would make her tongue dry for a year each time she tried to sell anything that skipped the work of repair. A city runs on habits. Greywall had acquired one, walking to the Wildering before making declarations. Elowen did that now. She stood under the heart tree that had once tasted her father's ambition and placed her ear to bark. Sap talks slowly, but it tells you everything. What does it want? She asked Mir, who was listening to the same story in a different dialect. For you to kneel, Mir said, and for you to ask nothing in return. Elowen knelt, not to Mir, to balance. She pressed her palm to roots that had learned King Alden's name the hard way. I cannot undo theft I did not commit, she said. But I can refuse to profit from it. I can return what is still returnable. I can teach my city to taste labor and like it. The Wildering tasted the salt at the corner of her mouth and approved. That night, a child was born in Greywall who cried and tasted honey. Another followed, and another. Curses do not vanish. They thin. They leave scaffolds of lesson and a shadow for memory. Elowen used both. When she was 18, Elowen asked Mir to bless a bridge built at the river's gentle bend. The stone did not argue. The water flirted. The bees considered and assented. Alden would have called it an apology. Elowen called it a beginning. Rumor, that old animal, woke at the city's edge and stretched. The warder will ask for a price, said the suspicious. The price is already paid, said those who had learned to count. Into this almost peace, trouble walked openly. A god in exile, antlers like mountains, eyes like weather no one has words for. He came from the far north where forests stand on legs of frost and names are carved in glacier. He had waited while smaller stories tired themselves. Now he smiled, which made nothing warmer, and stepped into the Wildering with the right of one who is older than manners. Daughter of Thorn, he said to Mir, you have learned to curse nicely. I am bored by niceness. Elowen, he said to the girl standing as if ready to push a mountain, you have taught a city to share. I am bored by sharing. What do you want? Elowen asked. He looked at the heart tree and smiled as if remembering how to break a promise with flair. A wager, he said. I take your forest sleep for a season. If you keep your city kind without it, I return what I borrowed interested in your bravery. If you fail, I keep your warder's name. Mir did not step back. You cannot take what does not belong to you, she said. I am a god, he said. Ownership is a hobby for mortals. Then I will be tedious, Elowen replied, stepping between god and tree, and insist on paperwork. He laughed, which sounded like ice collapsing. Very well, he said. You have 3 nights. On the third, the Wildering sleeps. Keep Greywall from feeding on itself. If you succeed, I leave. If you fail, I take Mir and install a guardian of stone who will never forgive you. He vanished like mist, obeying a command word. Mir looked at Elowen with the gaze she reserved for students who mistake ambition for plan. You cannot win this. I can refuse to lose, Elowen said. That's different. Both will get you tired and bitten, Mir replied, but there was pride at the edge of the scold. Corin arrived with bad news packaged as logistics. We can ration. We can close gates. We can throw a festival, Elowen said. Mir arched a brow. Explain. 3 nights, Elowen said, pacing. A god wants us to prove we're not kind only when supervised by trees. So we practice unsupervised kindness loudly. We make rules that look like fun. We make fun that behaves like rules. Corin smiled despite himself. I love you, he said, to the plan, to the warder, to the part of himself that had stopped trying to be both brother and boy. It didn't matter which. Some confessions fit all doors. The Wildering slept then, on cue, with a sigh that moved birds for miles. The heart tree's leaves stilled. Bees closed shop. Fireflies went on holiday. Magic tucked itself into a drawer and left a note. Back soon, don't burn the house. Greywall woke to a city without forest guardianship. The old monsters at the edge of men's patience stirred. The hedge witch started brewing compliance again. Asterian partners would exist in another tale. Here, a banker ran numbers like knives and dreamed of privatizing rain. Elowen lit lanterns shaped like moons and hung them across every street. She declared a vigil of stories. If you must take, she proclaimed, take turns. If you must speak, speak what happened to you, not what you fear about someone else. If you must eat more than your share, bring a song. People obeyed for the novelty of it. Then they obeyed for the pleasure. Food tastes better when the person who cooked it mentions who taught them the spice. Wine makes better apologies than speeches. Children told stories about wolves that wanted to learn to read. Men told stories about their father's hands. Women told stories about days when their names felt too small. The city forgot to be hungry for harm. The god in exile prowled market and alley like a reviewer. He found kindness everywhere moderately irritating. He tried sabotage. A whisper here, a temptation there. They failed because the city had acquired a habit of checking its impulses aloud. On the 3rd night, he stood on the bridge Elowen had asked Mir to bless and listened. The river told him secrets. None were to his taste. He sighed. You have built something dull, he said. Dull lasts, Elowen said. You should try it. He considered taking offense. He considered taking Mir anyway. Gods do that sometimes when outwitted by fewer antlers. Then the oldest bee landed on his eyebrow and stung him not out of malice but pedagogy. It delivered a very small lesson about scales. Fine, he said, and returned the Wildering sleep. For now, I am not sentimental. I prefer grief to routine. But even I respect a festival executed properly. He left. The lanterns went out. The forest woke like a choir breathing in after the conductor raises her hands. Mir's antlers glowed once where Elowen had tied a ribbon years before. You are a decent bridge, Mir said. I am a loved fracture, Elowen corrected, because she had learned how to praise herself without becoming unbearable. There will be other gods, Mir warned. There will be other festivals, Elowen said. The hedge witch sulked. She swallowed her own syrup by accident and had to tell the truth to a stranger for a day. The banker decided to retire his knives and build benches. Corin baked bread and wept into it like a man who has finally learned what ovens are for. Spring became a trustworthy habit. For a while, because curses are roads, and roads, if kept in good repair, lead to travelers. One arrived on a winter night all in white, cloak, hair, mouth. She looked like salt posing as sugar and introduced herself as Silva, which means forest in Latin and warning in the old tongue. She asked to see Mir. She asked to see Elowen. She smiled in a way that tasted like bargains. Behind her, far to the north, a line of trees walked forward 1 mile the way men move borders. The god in exile had found a friend, and the Wildering sharpened its thorns. Silva did not sit when offered a chair, she leaned. People who lean are practicing ownership in advance. Your forest woke something in the north, she said. Our trees remember empires. My patron prefers the term restoration. Restoration, Mir repeated, making a small hole in the word and peering through it. Of what, and for whom? Elowen's bridge looks modern, Silva said, eyes on the river as if it had something to apologize for. Let's see how it fares when the water insists on being army. What do you want? Elowen asked again, because asking twice is a way to see if an answer has legs. Witness, Silva said, and perhaps assistance when the maps require your signature. No, Elowen said before the sentence sat down. Maps are gossip until rivers approve. Silva smiled the way ice smiles at spring. I will enjoy making you cry, she said without heat, and left. 3 days later the river fell asleep. Not froze, not dried, slept. Its surface went slack as a long blink. Boats halted mid-stroke. Fish hovered like courteous exclamation points. Mills sulked. The bees hummed lower. Men argued about physics, which never answers back at parties. Can a river sleep? Corin asked. Yes, Mir said, when sung to by someone who knows its lullabies. Silva had. She was old in the way canyons are old, long memory, sharp appetite. Elowen gathered counselors, bakers, midwives, people who knew bridges, people who knew arguments. We keep the city thirsty but not savage, she said. We find who sang. We wake the river gently or it will bite. The hedge witch offered ideas. They were all shortcuts. The beekeepers offered honey. It was all honest. Mir offered silence and told everyone to listen harder than they liked. Rivers talk, she said. Mostly about gravity's manners. Elowen walked the bank, crown in her hand like a bull that might want soup. Children followed, because children do when leaders go interesting places. She told them to count stones that looked like teeth. She told them not to throw. She told them to bring her the smoothest they found. They brought 27. She sent each to a house where grief lived now, not in memory. Put this on your table, she said. When you eat, hold it in your left hand and tell it one sentence about a person you miss, true and without embroidery. Grief is water's cousin. The stones took the stories like sugar lumps take tea. At midnight, Elowen poured the stones into the river. It shivered. Who taught you that? Mir asked, approving without smiling. Myself, Elowen said, pretending not to show off. Silva answered by sending sleep into the city's wells. Faucets yawned. Buckets forgot being useful. Throats dried into sulks. The festival trick would not work twice. Habit was now needed more than spectacle. Greywall improvised altruism. They instituted thirst hours, windows when water would run like laughter, and at all other times not at all. People adapted. They learned to bring pitchers to neighbors who slept through the whistle. They learned to share washing with gossip. The city discovered it liked being needed by itself. Mir went north. She walked through a winter that had decided to be thorough. Snow made her antlers a crown of muffled bells. Sylva's trees met her like border guards who had memorized their scripts and took pride in refusing passports. She spoke the language of elder bark and was allowed through reluctantly. At the center of this annexing forest, in a clearing shaped like a decision, stood the exiled god, older, bored again, petting a wolf made of drift. "You return to my theater," he said without joy. "I return to my work," she said. "You are in the way." Sylva circled, trailing frost. "We want your name," she said to Mir, "because a forest with a famous warder sells better to gods and kings who like to collect things they cannot keep." "Try," Mir said, "because sometimes you must remind villains that your teeth are not only for smiling at children. They set their trap politely." Sylva hummed to roots until they softened into snares. The god asked the sky to turn phrases into nets. Mir walked the line where two vanities meet and found the knot that had been tied in another century by a man in love with being the first to do anything. She untied it. Traps collapse when you remove the sentence that excused them. The roots remembered they are meant for holding earth, not heroes. The nets lost interest in nouns. The god sighed, then smiled. He actually enjoys being outwitted if the method is elegant. Sylva did not. Elegance makes her itch. "You could rule," Sylva told Mir, trying one last time to pitch the oldest poison. "You could be law, not ward." "I am law," Mir said. "The kind that leaves room for children to break it without dying." Sylva showed her teeth. "Then I will go to the city," she said, "and teach them to love my kind of order, clean, quiet, sugarless." She vanished toward Greywall like winter, finding the door left ajar. Elowen met her at the bridge. "You sleep rivers," Elowen said, "because you were once frozen and decided to make your wound into a sermon." Sylva inclined her head. "Very good. I despise sermons, but I admire people who read me properly." "Why this?" Elowen asked. "Why now?" "Because gods starve without chaos," Sylva said frankly. "Your city is becoming pantry-free." Elowen laughed. "We have plenty of chaos. We're just learning to post menus." Sylva struck then, fast as icicles. She sent stillness through the bridge, the kind that cracks, not the kind that rests. Stone answered with complaint. Elowen slapped her palm against the keystone and spoke a small sentence she had saved for this. "I accept help." Mir arrived at her back like the concept of an. They held the bridge together between them, girl and warder, antler and crown, thorn and ribbon. Corin wedged himself under an arch and pushed the way men push when they have decided that usefulness is a better story than guilt. Beekeepers smeared the keystone with honey because faith is sticky. Children threw their grief stones again, because practice makes ritual and ritual makes cities stubborn. The bridge held. Sylva let go, not because she was kind, but because she was bored, which is sometimes enough. "I will go write my name on something less defended," she said, and did, which is why deserts exist. The river woke with a long blink. Fish remembered that forward is a choice. Mills resumed judgment. Bees applauded in their small way. Greywall exhaled generosity and then inhaled it again so they would have more later. "Debt?" Elowen asked Mir, because she had learned to price miracles before people assign them bargains that will injure. "Paid," Mir said, "with interest. In stories." They walked the bank and counted the new kinds of stones grief had made lovely. Corin tried to plan a feast and was told to wait. Bread tastes better when some of it is eaten in dark kitchens by tired people before the party, and he was learning to allow joy to be untidy. Elowen returned the crown to her head and wore it like a tool, not a trophy. Mir adjusted her thistles and allowed 2 more flowers for sweetness she had not planned. Greywall slept with its windows open for the first time in a long while. The Wildering watched without envy. A god in exile sulked with more grace than most kings. Silva carved her name on an iceberg and felt, for 1 second, the urge to apologize to a river. She did not. Perhaps next century. Morning woke to find a child on the edge of the forest poking a mushroom with a stick and asking it to please stop being disgusting. The mushroom refused, as is its right. Elowen smiled at the ordinariness of it. And in the cellars beneath Greywall, where old kings dry into furniture, a seed sneezed. It had drifted there on a guard's boot years ago and found dust hospitable. It sprouted in darkness and learned the shape of stone before light. It listened to all the arguments and decided to become a door. Some stories begin with invitations. Some begin with theft. This one would bend toward adoption. The seed that sneezed grew into a sapling like a whispered no. The sellers learned the smell of green again. The thistle on the crown of the throne room pricked a page boy, and his cry echoed down the stairs and told the sapling it was time. It pushed at bricks. It wrote itself into mortar. It found the path rats take when architects insist there isn't one. It broke into a hallway and blinked leaves at light. Elowen found it sneaking past the old kings. She did not scream, which is one reason she got to be queen. "Hello," she said, as one says to dogs and gods. "Are you lost or arriving?" It chose arriving, and she accepted that as law. Mir came because plants tell on each other, and this one had a loud voice for such small leaves. She knelt and tasted the sap. "Wildering," she said, but city grown. "A bridge," Elowen said, and the sapling preened. "Old kings will not like roots in their pedestals," Corin observed, and the sapling preened harder. "Let them learn," Elowen said, and called for a window to be opened and a small boy with a watering can who looked like someone who would be faithful to schedule more than inspiration. The sapling grew. It learned dust first, then sun. It learned footfalls and which ones hurry. It learned that stones have arguments about purpose. It sent a root down into the oldest crack and asked politely if water lived there. Water yawned and said sometimes. In the 4th spring of Elowen's reign, a message came from the far south. "A king desires your warder's blessing for a road across a dead marsh." The letter tasted like arrogance rinsed in vinegar to appear polite. Mir would have sent back nettles tied with pretty string. Elowen wrote instead, "Blessings cost work. Roads eat cultures if fed wrong. Bring your counsel to my bridge for 3 days. If you can listen without defending yourself, I will show you where to place your feet." The southern king came with banners and compliments. He lasted through 1 day of silence under the heart tree before declaring he had other urgencies. Mir did not bind him because he had bound himself to noise already. At midsummer, children from both city and forest lined the bridge and dropped thistle fluff into the water to wager where it might land. Beekeepers judged distance. Bakers provided consolation. Elowen officiated like a priest of trivial joy. Mir stood in shade and relearned the pleasure of watching a thing happen without needing to correct its grammar. Silva sent a single raven feather as apology. It was not sufficient, but it was interesting. The hedge witch opened a shop for things that take time, sourdough starters, herbs that only taste right in year 2, needles that refuse to sew cheap cloth. She learned to enjoy losing customers she would have harmed. Alden would have hated all this, mostly because there were no parades that centered him. He would have loved one thing, though: the way the city told its story at night when lanterns did not need magic to be meaningful. Even kings who break forests enjoy evidence that their people can hum themselves to sleep safely. When the sapling in the cellars reached a height that made it mischief, Elowen planted her palm on its bark and asked, "What do you want?" "To be a door," it answered, purely, the way young things answer till they learn half-tones. "To where?" she asked. "To the place where promises go when you keep them." Elowen laughed and called for Mir. "You asked for kneeling," the queen said. "Teach me again." Mir brought iron flowers shaped like kindness that knows how to bite. She brought honey, because sweetness is a tool when used by someone who doesn't need it to lie. She brought stones held by people telling sentences about grief. She brought children because doors should meet future first. They stood before the sapling. Elowen knelt, not to Mir, to the door she was making with stubbornness. "I return what I can," she said, to the Wildering, to the parts of herself that preferred shortcuts, to the old habit of Greywall that had tried to be adult while starving its throat of sugar. "I will be a bridge even when I want a throne." The sapling shivered. Its roots found a spring. Its trunk widened. It cracked the cellars where old kings sulk and let wind in. Dust learned to leave. The door opened. First for bees, then for children, then for a very old woman who had never forgiven herself for a lie she told in a kitchen before dawn. She stepped through and came back smelling like clover and relief. "Where does it lead?" Corin asked, exactly as Mir did not. "To after," Elowen said. Greywall and the Wildering kept their treaty by making it unnecessary. People walked the bridge for excuses they pretended were errands. Wolves learned road rules. Roads learned tree manners. Festivals kept their lanterns for nights when gods grew bored and needed reminding that boredom is not a virtue. A final thing, because endings deserve a stitch that holds. Years later, when Elowen's hair had gone the color of saplings in late winter, silver with green hiding, she asked Mir to sit with her at the river one dawn. They watched the water rehearse being ordinary. "I cursed your father," Mir said, "no apology, only archive." "You taught him," Elowen replied. "He failed the course." They laughed, the way women do when they finally have the time to own their laughter. "You gave me back my city," Elowen said. "You made me want it," Mir said. "I am a warder. I am not designed to love crowns." "You made one behave. And you made me kneel," Elowen said, which in her mouth was a thank you. They touched foreheads, antler to crown, thorn to gold. Bees changed key. The river blinked approval. Somewhere very far to the north, a god in exile paused and admitted he had less to complain about this century. Silva walked the edge of a dune and did not write her name. The hedge witch taught a teenager to embroider patience into hems. The sapling down in the cellars opened and closed for people who had learned to bring a story instead of a sword. If you stand on Elowen's bridge on the first day of autumn and drop a thistle seed into the water, it will show you where the current prefers to go. Follow it. Kneel when you reach a door. Ask permission. Return what you can. Teach your tongue to taste honey again, and do not trust sweetness that arrives before work. And if a woman with antlers smiles at you from the shade, bow as if to an old friend who never needed your approval but appreciates your manners. The Wildering keeps its laws. So does Greywall now. Balance is not a victory. It is a practice. This, more than any crown, is what lasts.